All right. Welcome to the few of you that joined us. And thank you to everyone else who stayed from the first session to jump into the second session. We are going to go ahead and move through these introductory slides. Again, I am Serenity Moore, and I am a coordinator for new employee onboarding and induction.
And I am Mary Hart, and this is my 4th year as a consulting teacher. And welcome, we're so glad you're here. Okay, I'm gonna pause for a moment. Are you adding in the chat, Serenity, putting the links back in the chat? Okay, welcome to those who are just rolling in. We're gonna put the links for you in the chat. There's a capture sheet, there's the slide set, and then there's an article that we're gonna just touch on towards the end of the session. Alrighty. And the capture sheet there is linked for you. It'll force a copy. It's a place for you to take notes, and then there's some resources linked in there as well. Our outcomes for today, we're gonna, in this short time, we're all gonna get smarter, as Serenity says, and understanding how adult beliefs, behaviors, and ways of being can impact students. We will ask you to be able to define key principles of equity-centered trauma-informed practices. We're gonna identify priorities and strategies that will help us align our intentions and impact. And act, we're gonna ask you to plan how you use this knowledge moving forward. All right, so again, those of you rolling in, we're gonna put the links you need in the chat, but everybody else, we're gonna ask you to just briefly write a short sentence to tell why you chose to attend this session. We ask you not to click enter to share until a Serenity or I prompt you to do so. So we get that nice rolling in waterfall effect. So take about 30 seconds. All right, go ahead and hit enter. So I always like to take this moment to really set an intention when I'm in a learning. It helps me focus, helps me take away more than I might have. And so thank you for doing the same. All right, I'm gonna pause just a moment because we've got people rolling in. Welcome if you're just coming in. It is Todd. It's affecting all of us, right? A safe place for both students and staff. I really appreciate that. Yes, this is for all of us. Some specific strategies. Yeah, ESOL students. Yes, yes, yes. Awesome. Thank you, to help them in the moment. Yes, yes, so important. And it is, Caroline, it is a broad topic. We can spend a lot of time. You know, I feel like I've spent the past 2 years reading and learning, and there's still so much more for me to learn. So thank you for taking this little bit of time with us. And I'm going to turn it to Serenity.
Thank you, Mary. So we really are here to just build our capacity as teachers about how we can get smarter about the principles of equity-centered trauma-informed education. And what you're going to see on this screen are 6 principles of equity-centered trauma and informed education. So I'm going to take a moment to read the title of each principle, and I want you to read the details of that principle. So principle 1 is anti-racist, anti-oppression. Principle 2, asset-based. Principle 3, systems-oriented. Principle 4, human-centered. Principle 5, universal and proactive. Principle 6, social justice focused. So when we are approaching our students through an equity-centered lens, we see that it is essential not to label students, but instead to take on a trauma-informed lens. So instead of seeing kids as broken, as needing to be fixed, or focusing on what is wrong with them, we again want to consider all the experiences our students have had and what are the needs they are communicating through their words, actions, or even inactions. So we're asking you through this session and as you move forward in your career and working and supporting students, to be intentional about putting your trauma glasses on. Because when you make decisions from that perspective, you will be able to maintain a healthy relationship with your students, which is necessary and critical for students that have experienced trauma. So when we are approaching our students, okay, we really want to consider their experiences. And so there are two authors, Kristen Sowers and Pete Hall, who challenge us to look beyond those students' behavior and to focus on motive. So if you think about what our experiences were in undergrad and graduate school as we prepared for this career or any certification program, as educators, many of us were taught to respond to the behavior that is presented in front of us by the student. We learned about developmentally appropriate behaviors and effective classroom management techniques. As a result, many of us associate behaviors with choice. I want to say that again. As a result, many of us associate behaviors with choice. For example, as a secondary high school teacher, I'm saying every single day, I'm asking kids to come in with their notebooks, with their pencils, with whatever supplies that are necessary for my class. And now it's November and you roll in here after Thanksgiving break and you don't have these things together. As a teacher, I can process that you don't even want to do well. You're not trying to do well. You've made a choice to come here ill prepared. And so what we're asking you to do is shift your perspective, because sometimes those actions or inactions from a kid are not a choice. So now look beyond choice at motive. If we can identify what may be motivating students to react, then we can redirect them by providing alternative options for them to manage their stress. It's up to us. I want to give you another quote. It's up to us, the adults in their lives, to offer an array of appropriate alternative means for students to regulate their emotions and manage the intensity of their behaviors. What we can do as adults, what we can do as educators, is we can teach students to recognize when they are in their downstairs brain versus their upstairs brain. And we want to be able to quickly and intentionally give students the tools to get back upstairs when they find themselves downstairs. You could go to the next Mary. Thank you. So this is a graph that we want to take a moment to unpack for you. If you look at the y-axis, You'll see there's infant and toddler, preschool, childhood, adolescence, and then young adult. If you look on the y-axis, which runs north and south, you'll see regulation. And so the title of this slide is the balance of self-regulation and co-regulation. So I want to give you a little bit of information before we take a deeper dive to unpack this graph. It's an important part of developing independence or self-regulation is co-regulation. So co-regulation and self-regulation are partnered together in a healthy development. So let's take a look at this self-regulation pathway. You'll see that line that's moving through the middle of that graph. Our ability to control our thoughts, our behaviors, and emotions, that is referred to as self-regulation. So if you think about it, when a student can recognize that they're upset and they can communicate that they're angry and they can find a way to calm down, that is an example of self-regulation. However, having the skill of self-regulation, that is an important skill to set to support learning. So we participate in a student's ability to be able to self-regulate. And our participation in that ability to self-regulation is co-regulation, is supporting them through their decision-making and through their actions in the classroom. So again, looking at this graph, self-regulation isn't fully achieved until adulthood. Adulthood, that's 21. Most of us do not have students who are in that age range. And most children are slowly building over time their ability to self-regulate. And that again is achieved through co-regulation. We are those lines pushing down on that graph. We are at the top. And so when we approach building self-regulation through an equity-centered, trauma-informed approach, that means we remember that co-regulation is developmentally appropriate, and we support, we teach, we coach, we connect with students to build self-regulation over time. So this is ideally how students are developing. If you look down at that infant toddler area, it is mostly co-regulation. If you move into adult, you see that co-regulation section is smaller. If we're in elementary school, we're in that preschool childhood range. If we're in secondary, we're in that adolescence range. There's still a significant amount of co-regulation that is required for students to be successful and for them to develop healthy self-regulation. So I know as a secondary person, I remember myself saying, so I'm going to admit it and be vulnerable, I'm preparing them for college. I have these routines in place. I'm preparing them for college. I'm preparing them for the workforce. Their boss is not going to remind them to do X. Their college professor is not going to remind them to do X. And what I'm here to say is that approach is inappropriate. It's not based in research. We must provide co-regulation to provide healthy spaces for students to develop that independence and have their own self-regulation. Those two red circles that we have on the graph, those are in the ideal situations. If students have experienced trauma, those red circles begin to slide back down that graph. And here's what we know. We have an entire generation of kids that experienced 2 years of trauma from the pandemic. So you can go ahead and move those circles down. And remember, you are going to need to support your kids much differently than you have pre this pandemic. Mary, I'm transitioning to you, but is there anything else that you would like to add?
No, that's it beautifully. Co-regulation, it's modeling our own self-regulation in front of kids. It's coaching them in the skills, teaching them the skills, just as you said. So thank you. That was beautiful. So again, we want to take a moment to hear from you. Thank you. On mute. So kind of 3 chunks of what this can look like is providing a warm, responsive relationship, structuring the environment in a manner, that is conducive to this, and then teaching and coaching self-regulation skills. So in the chat, if you would just take a moment, if you have any specific examples of how you have helped a child co-regulate or help, kind of set up the framework in your classrooms, just go ahead and drop that in the chat. I know you all have been working hard at that this year. And it doesn't have to fit into one of these categories, but it can. Asking kids if they're okay goes a long way. It does. It does. And sometimes they can't answer verbally, but they can show you in other ways, right? Thank you, Thomas.
And it's okay if you don't have any to share now, because that's why we're here, right? To get smarter about this.
Grading students. Yeah. So from the moment, I'm so glad you're here. That can go such a long way. Talking about one-on-one real life stuff, start each class with an off-topic discussion. I love it. A cereal soup. I love those arguments, right? There's not a right answer. Allowing for choice. Yes. Talking with kids in the hall. Walk and talks are fantastic. Give them a space to get organized materials and everything. Yeah. So then there's no shaming in it, right? You set up a structure where they can be successful. Thank you so much. All of these, and I know we're rolling in, really speak to what we're going to talk about now. So equity-centered trauma-informed practices you can really build a foundation on these priorities. Research really supports that these 4 pieces are really essential for students. So that's predictability, flexibility, empowerment, and connection. And as you learn, we're going to engage you in just a little bit of reading. Why are these priorities important? And what are you already doing to include these in your practices? So what many of you shared in the chat can really fall into some of these categories. So in your capture sheet, there's a linked resource called 4 Priorities. It's a 1-pager. I'm going to ask you to take about a minute and a half to just read through that. It's going to give the definition and some examples of each of these, and then we're going to use those in a scenario. So I'm going to stop talking for a moment. Take about 30 more seconds to just look at the key points. All right, so I'm going to ask you to leave that document open because you're going to use it. Just looking in the chat. Yes, Autumn, absolutely. That's predictability. Okay, so we're going to have you engage with a story from the field. This is a real scenario from a middle school classroom. It speaks to how teacher beliefs and actions really impact students. So again, this is also linked in the chat. Serenity just put it in the chat. If you would open that up, take a moment to read through, and then we're gonna engage in a discussion of a couple of questions. So again, I'll stop talking for a moment. All right. So hopefully you had a time to read through and think about how the two teachers responded to Alicia. And we want to engage you in two questions. So the first is, faced with the same student situation, two teachers entered this situation with different mindsets and beliefs. So first, what implications did this have for the student? And I'm going to pause before we respond. I'm just making note of time. We might run just a little bit over. If you can stay with us, we'd love it. And a little bit means, just a couple of minutes past 11. If you need to go, we understand. The full session video will be available. But now back to our show. So what implications did the teacher's beliefs and behaviors have on Alicia? So we're just going to start with that. And you can respond in the chat. You can unmute and share out loud if you would like to.
Sounded like the majority of the teachers saw the student as broken or needed fixing instead of looking at the trauma and working from there.
Yeah, so what impact did that have on Alicia?
She rose to the challenge when she was empowered.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing, Jessica. Anyone else want to add anything? Again, you can add in the chat or just unmute.
It seems to me that the second teacher, by giving her those leadership tasks and the empowerment, that it provided a stability in some way, a sense of strength, almost like a reliability, so that it's something familiar and comfortable to her, to help her recenter and get back to regulating. I don't know if that's correct. That's my
Yes, Mindy. Well, of course it's correct, and it's your perception, right? And so that leads us really into the second question. So where do we see examples of these four priorities of predictability, balanced with flexibility, empowerment, connection? I see Casey in the chat. The first teacher coddled the student in a way that did not give Alicia a space to express herself. The second teacher gave a space for the student to express herself. Absolutely. And Heather, in the one class, Alicia learned how she could use her situation as an excuse and could avoid work. The other teacher held her accountable and gave her something to focus on that was outside herself and that built her self-esteem. Yes. Lift our kids up. We can find what they're good at instead of dismissing, right? It's this concept of an asset-based mindset versus a deficit-based mindset. So, and I'm thinking about what you shared, Mindy. You know, I see examples in what you shared of both a predictability, but also empowerment and connection, right? And having the student connect with other students, she's building those relationships, because it's not just teacher student, it's teacher student, student to other adults in the building are important for connection. Other things that you saw, or other evidence that other people saw of any of these four priorities with the teacher that was more successful in supporting Alicia?
I would just say that the flexibility to see that the child can contribute in different ways, and which also led to the empowerment of the child. It's just so hard because I think that the first teacher kind of thought they were being helpful or didn't have a bad intention, but maybe just, didn't know a better way. So that's why I think with trauma, the more you know, the better that you can do for the students.
Yeah, Carolyn, that is so important what you said. I absolutely feel like that first teacher had the best of intentions, right? And sometimes the impact of what we do just doesn't result in where we wanted it to, how we wanted it to result. And so this isn't about shaming one teacher at all. And I think about in my own career, right, where if I could go back, I would do things differently, right? We feel for our kids, we want to protect and take care of them. And I think about that even with my own children, right? If I could put them in a bubble, but if I really put them in a bubble, that wouldn't really serve them well. So thank you for raising that. It's not about intentions. We're incredible teachers, but it's that impact. And the more you know, right, the better you can do. So thank you for bringing that up. And I think in education, we're often pulled into a deficit mindset unintentionally, because we so often focus on, okay, what are the test scores? Okay, who's not doing good? What are they missing? What don't they know? Rather than from this place of, okay, what are the strengths we can build upon? How do I empower? How do I build up so all my students are in that learning brain, and then I can build the skills, help them build the skills, so that we're doing it together piece.
I think that trauma informed is so hard to work on as a group, because you bring up these items and people say, well, of course I accept my students unconditionally. Of course I do that. I mean, we all think we're doing the best.
Yes.
So it's really hard to keep the dialogue going. But then we all say they won't put their phones away. They won't do this. And so we stop looking for the root and we're just looking at the action. So I just think it's such a hard conversation to continually have, but it's really important.
Yes. Oh my gosh, that's so true, right? Because as adults too, we can get in our feelings, right? And then get triggered and get defensive and do our own fight or flight piece. But I think the more we stay open to the conversations, the more we heal as adults as well. And the better we serve our students, the better we feel. So, it does take work, but I think it's also healing in that. So thank you so much for sharing, Carolyn.
The other thing about trauma is its unpredictability.
Yes.
You never know when it's going to hit in a classroom, and it can blindside you. And it's how are you going to react emotionally to that, especially if it's ongoing and lasts.
Absolutely.
It can be a lifetime thing, honestly. I've seen individuals who are dealing with, the sexual assaults, these kinds of things. So don't be surprised by anything that happens in a classroom.
Yes, Martin, and that's so important, right? It's not, this is not a magic bullet. I'm going to do this and then the child will be fine, right? Or I'll be fine. So there's that piece of it, and there's our own work that we need to put in. And there's a saying that just predict that it'll be unpredictable, and then build lots of strategies. For me, it's mindfulness practices so that I can just take that pause before responding to a student. Other people have other strategies, but that's it. We're essential in this. And because we're essential, we have to take care of ourselves in those moments as well. So thank you, Martin. The last piece, and I know some of you are needing to roll off, but we are going to just ask you to skim this article. We shared it at the beginning. You might have already had a moment to skim, but just in kind of coming to a close, if you can find a quote in there that resonates with you, throw that in the chat, just as a way to kind of wrap this up. We as adults want unconditional positive regard, right? When we make mistakes, we don't want to be shamed for it. We want to be taught and learn and grow. Our students want the same thing. So I'm going to stop talking for a moment. If you just skim, copy and paste one quote into the chat from that. It stands in opposition to savior mentality. Yes, yes, yes. And yeah, serenity, that distance between stimulus and response. And for me, mindfulness practices have helped with that, but there are lots of ways. Seeing and truly getting to know our students. Yes. Yeah, conditional versus unconditional. Thank you, Jessica. Hannah, yeah, I love that quote. In a way that says they matter and that their presence is important, and more important than how fast they got here. Thank you. Yeah, they have worth no matter what. Thank you, Amy. Yeah, I like that one too, Daphne, those small moments, not during the planned or canned activities. Although those can help, it is those small moments. Yes, thank you, Casey. And sitting in silence, and a couple of you talked about that. When a child is triggered, they just sometimes can't talk, can't express. So it's just sitting and being present. And Carolyn, yeah, that stance. Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. No, the sum of all their strengths and challenges, and choose to care for them, right? And I think sometimes it's seeing their greatness even when they can't see it themselves, right? In those moments when our kids or our colleagues are suffering, that we hold that vision of them so that they can move back into it for themselves. Awesome. Thank you all. So just to wrap up, we just want you to remember that children and adults have an inherent capacity to survive, thrive, and heal. Trauma is an absolutely normal response to threat. So there's nothing to fix about trauma-affected children or adults, but instead we need to focus on the agency and the self-determination of all, and so that they can feel empowered. So forever changed, but not forever damaged is the quote we want you to leave with. And then we ask you to just take a moment and think about what's one action that you can take moving forward. One that we're going to ask you to take is to complete the evaluation survey. It's linked in the chat. It would help out the EdCamp team and us as well. But after you do that, where are you going to take this tomorrow or tonight as you plan for tomorrow? And I'm going to stop sharing and thank you all for being here. And I'm going to stop recording as well.